It's still very early in the Democratic presidential primary for 2020, but already we're seeing some interesting movement in the polls. Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders have topped most of the early polling so far, but this week, 3 different polls showed Senator Elizabeth Warren, whose campaign has been doggedly focused on policy, not flash, climb into the top 3. One poll even found Warren 1 point ahead of Sanders in a statistical dead heat. Earlier this week, Lawrence spoke with Senator Warren about how her policy-driven campaign might be affecting her standing in those new national polls.
Let's agree it's way too early for the polls to be telling us anything definitive about what's going to happen in this race. But there's very good news for 2 candidates in there. There's very good news for Joe Biden, who's at the top of all of these polls. And the other good news is for your candidacy, which has moved up, and actually it's in the top 3 of each one of these polls, coming in number 2 in one of the polls, moving slightly ahead of Senator Sanders, actually in a statistical tie with him. But you're at 12 and he's at 11. That's a big jump up for you in that poll, and everyone has been noticing that you have been rolling out more new policy, and I want to stress new policy because it's one thing for candidates to be coalescing around things like Medicare for All, which is an idea that has been gaining traction over time, but you and some of the other candidates are introducing new policies, but no one more than you. Do you believe that this move in your candidacy is actually about these policies, that's what voters are listening to in this campaign?
So look, I can't say anything about the polls. It is way, way too early on polls. But here's what I can tell you. Having a chance to go out and talk with people all across this country about how we could actually make this government work, not just for a thin slice at the top, but make it work for everyone else. And watching people engage that idea, it's enormously exciting. You know, I get out and talk about a wealth tax. 2 cents on every dollar above $50 million for the great fortunes in this country. Just 2 cents. They pitch that in, and all of a sudden, as a country, we could provide universal child care, universal pre-K. We could pay our child care and pre-K workers professional level wages. We could do universal college. We could knock off student loan debt for nearly 95% of the people who have student loan debt and still have nearly $1 trillion left over. $1 trillion to put into green energy, to put into infrastructure. That's how you begin to rebalance an economy. So it isn't just working for those at the top. It's working for everybody. We could actually do that.
We have a page 1 report in the New York Times above the fold about the biggest corporations in this country not just paying 0 in corporate taxes, actually, and you know the punchline to this, getting a rebate. Yeah. And I got to say, that shocked me, even having worked on tax law myself. I understand that they get away with paying 0, but the idea that Amazon and some of these big companies actually getting a rebate from the government, this is the kind of issue you've been talking about consistently. And when I read in that story are quotes from voters who are very angry about this, and they're not attaching in that article to particular candidates, but it's very clear to me that the Democratic campaign, you in particular and some of the other candidates, are talking very specifically to that issue.
Yep. So I have another proposal. I got a plan for that. And the other plan around corporate taxes is to acknowledge those big companies that are doing that, like Amazon. They tell the public, they tell their investors, they set their executive compensation on saying, we made more than $10 billion in after-tax profits. Woohoo. And then they turn around and say to the IRS, well, by the time we've jumped through this loophole and done this part and done this trick, it's actually 0, or you owe us a refund. You know, that's just not right. So what I've proposed is that for the big companies, the ones making more than $100 million in income each year, that they pay 7 cents on the dollar, 7% of what they publicly announce as their after-tax income. They do that whatever the rest of the taxes are, because we shouldn't be in an America where, you know, most Americans are paying taxes, but these big guys are making $1 zillion, and yet they've wired the tax code so that they are either paying nothing or getting a refund. If we did that, we would raise $1 trillion over 10 years. And here's the deal. You know, for everybody across this country, we just want to say the guys at the top, whether it's a giant corporation or it's one of the great family fortunes in this country, you made it big. Good for you. But you built those fortunes, you know, employing workers the rest of us help pay to educate. You built those fortunes using roads and bridges all of us help to pay for to get your goods to market. You built those fortunes using police and firefighters all of us helped to pay for. And the deal is, you make it that big, put something back in so everybody else has got a chance to make it. That's what this is about. And that's what my campaign's about. It's about ideas, and it's about how we can really build a future together. And I hope that everybody who likes campaigns about ideas will go to ElizabethWarren.com, that they'll volunteer an hour, they'll pitch in $10. They'll be part of this, because this is how we're going to build an America that works not just for a thin slice at the top, but one that works for all of us.
Senator, I want to ask you what you would have said to the president if you were in that meeting with the Democratic leadership and the president on infrastructure. I'd also like to ask you what you think the House of Representatives should do in reaction to the president's obstruction on their subpoenas. But the commercial break structure of this show requires me to squeeze in a minute or so. Could you stay with us across that break, and we'll just do a couple more questions after that?
Of course, of course.
All right, we're going to be right back with Senator Elizabeth Warren.
We just had a very productive meeting with the President of the United States. We came to this meeting with an understanding that there is great need in our country for rebuilding our infrastructure.
We agreed on a number, which was very, very good, $2 trillion for infrastructure. Originally, we had started a little lower. Even the President was eager to push it up to $2 trillion.
And we're back with Senator Elizabeth Warren. Senator, as you know, the Democratic leadership, the House and Senate, met with the president to talk about infrastructure. It's hard for me to see them ever coming to an agreement. But if you were in that meeting, what would you have told President Trump about infrastructure?
So I really want to see us make an investment in infrastructure. This is how we build a future in this country. This is how we build jobs for the future in this country. We've got to make those investments. So I'd ask him, where's the money coming from? You know, we can't just talk about this in the abstract. I've got two proposals on the table, an ultra-millionaire's wealth tax and a corporate tax. Either one of them would raise money for $1 trillion in infrastructure spending. What's your plan, Mr. President?
How about an increase in the gasoline tax?
You know, I got to say, I have real hesitation about that. That hits working families hard. Why should we be going there instead of to the 75,000 richest families in this country? Why should we be going there instead of to corporations that announce $100 million or more in profits and are paying no taxes right now? Why don't we do something that's a little more progressive?
And you've seen the obstruction that the White House, the administration is now, and the Attorney General seems to be complicit in that obstruction of the House investigations on multiple fronts of the president, trying to deny all sorts of cooperation and subpoenas in a way that we've never seen before. You got an Attorney General saying, I will not take questions from counsel in House hearings, something that has been happening in hearings for my entire lifetime. What would be your suggestion to the House of Representatives about how to deal with this administration and the obstruction that they're running into now? So
I think this is a moment that, again, Congress needs to assert itself. We have responsibilities under the Constitution of the United States, including oversight responsibility. We're supposed to be out here to make laws, you know, to investigate the fact that a hostile foreign government attacked our elections in 2016 and to make sure that we are properly prepared as we roll into 2020. We have a job to do. And part of that involves getting information from the administration. So I have a lot of confidence in our leadership in the House. I know they will be strong on this. And they just need to keep bearing down, because the Constitution talks about two branches of government, not simply a president and everyone spinning around him.
Senator Warren, before you go, let me just squeeze in a question I've asked every presidential candidate who's been here. What is the best policy idea that you have heard from one of your competitors in this campaign?
Oh, I think Julian Castro, his idea around immigration and about changing how we treat people who come here and who are not documented. I think he's got some really good ideas around this. I'm very interested in his work. I admire it.
Senator Elizabeth Warren, thank you very much for joining us and for staying a little bit extra with us. We really appreciate it.
You bet.
Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.